Okay, hey guys, so this is video reflection 3 on developmental education. I really enjoyed this module because I do work at a community college, so I see the remedial courses firsthand and how they play into a student's success or non-success throughout their educational journey. Going to Georgia Southern, I wasn't even aware that remedial classes existed, so when I began working, it was a new concept for me. At GMC, we use the compass placement test instead of AccuPlacer. The scores can easily be converted, but this is just what we use. So since I was so long-winded last week, I'm going to focus on the two videos that stuck out most to me instead of trying to cover everything. The video on how Colorado redesigned their developmental education was very interesting to me. I really think this is something that other states can look at and use as a resource if they are also looking to do some research and implement some changes. Clearly what they found was that the more levels of developmental education a student has to go through, the less likely they are to complete their credit level courses, which didn't really surprise me that much, but mainly it was just the statistics of how bad it actually is. The students at first have a 63% chance of getting through the developmental class, and then of those, only 80% will move on to the next course. And then the even grimmer statistic is that only 16% will actually make it through the college level course once they reach it. This just kind of blew my mind that it was actually that low. It made me want to go dig around some into our analytics and see how our percentages stand. I'm sure we could pull some reports and kind of get some data. But basically, their main goal was to reduce the amount of time, the number of credits, and the number of classes spent in developmental education. And what shocked me about this was the levels that are required in Colorado. There are 4 developmental courses available before credit math. There's 3 before reading and then 3 before English. This is a lot different than us at GMC. We have 2 below English, 2 below math, and then 1 below reading because we recently did away with reading 97. So basically, they were looking to integrate some developmental reading and English content since some do overlap, and then condense and combine some of the classes. That's what we did. That's why we got rid of the Reading 97, and I think it definitely benefited us. I don't think that Reading 97 was necessarily needed. If anyone knows about Compass, y'all can feel free to argue with me on that, but that's just kind of how I felt about it. Also, I liked their idea of curriculum redesign by reverse design, working backwards and seeing what the students need to know for success in college level classes, and then providing them active learning experiences to do that. Another thing that surprised me was that any content which isn't at least at the 9th grade level um, isn't eligible for aid. I feel like our remedial courses are at least at the 11th or 12th grade, 10th grade level, and none of them are eligible for aid. So this surprised me that some of theirs were above the 9th grade level and that actually went as low as 9th grade level also. So if anything, I think the comparison shows how different developmental courses can be from state to state, but I do think it can still be useful for us all to have, each other's data and statistics, and we can use these only to better ourselves and see how we can improve or what changes we can make in our developmental education. But overall, there should be, like the video mentions, consistent administration statewide so that the strands of tests align much more specifically with the state's individual curriculum. And I would probably say that Georgia does a pretty good job of that. The other video that I wanted to talk about was the How to Escape Education's Death Valley. This was an interesting twist because I felt like the overall message was kind of anti-testing, but it also focused on the importance of the actual teaching and learning experience. I enjoyed how he discussed the task and achievement senses of verbs. So basically, he talked about even if you're engaged in an activity, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're achieving it. He said, like with dieting, which I thought was pretty humorous, just because you're dieting doesn't mean that you are actually losing weight. And this was a new way to look at it that I had never thought of. teaching is like this, and that just because you're engaged in the task of teaching, does that necessarily mean that you're fulfilling it? No. So you have to ask, is anyone actually learning? Are they being engaged? Are they being provoked? Are they being stimulated? All of these words he used. And I couldn't agree with him more on how the culture of education now focuses more on testing instead of teaching and learning. He mentions how tests should be diagnostic and help instead of the dominant culture. They should support it versus obstructing it. And just to touch on this, in my personal experience, I feel like I've seen this firsthand in the math section of the Compass test. This is usually the section that people perform more poorly on unless they just love math and are just amazing at it. But many of the students which we recruit, they're out of state or they're active military and they're stationed who knows where. They might be on a deployment, anything like that. And sometimes they can't always get to a testing center to take the test, because you have to have it proctored and all that, go through the scheduling and all of that. So after many months of creating an alternative means of testing and awaiting the final approval, our campus implemented a My Readiness test for the math portion of the Compass. It's done online by the student where he or she can work at their own pace on the practice problem and the practice test, and then the actual two tests are timed, and then the dean of our math department goes in and evaluates their performance based on the criteria that's in place by SACS, which is who we are accredited by, and she determines their actual placement. And what we have seen is that this is a much better indicator of a student's readiness for college level math than the actual Compass test. They do much better on it, and I feel like they're way more comfortable with it. In a way, it encourages creativity, and the student engages and learns more than just sitting down to take the Compass test at a remote center, where it might be cold in the room, they don't test well, they get test anxiety, whatever the case may be. And some may disagree with me, but I think Compass as a whole isn't a great placement tool for students anyway. Luckily, it is going away in November, so we've heard. But just like Colorado, we tried to work around the math barriers that we kept seeing with the students, and we've had great success with it. I think some other campuses might be implementing it as well in the coming months. So instead of being so standardized, I agree with Ken that we should awaken creativity and encourage it, which is just like one of Colorado's incentives that they talked about. And the last thing that I liked about the video was his mention of the involvement of government in teaching, not necessarily in the higher education field, but with many of my teacher friends who teach elementary and middle grades. I hear this complaint often in terms of paperwork and testing, and now there's even talk about teacher salaries being determined by test scores and pass rates, which seems pretty absurd in my opinion. But basically, I think this can be summed up by his quote, which I absolutely love. He said, "Education doesn't go on in the committee rooms of our legislative buildings. It happens in classrooms and schools, and the people who do it are teachers and students. And if you remove their discretion, it stops working. You have to put it back to the people." So I couldn't agree more with that. I think he had a lot of valid and great points, and I really enjoyed listening to that. I'll probably Google, some more of his videos. But that's all I have for you guys. So I hope you have a great week. Thanks.